everybody, DiaGuillotine here, and welcome to my review of Romantic Killers. This is a brand new anime that came out on Netflix. It's a Netflix exclusive show, and this show really flew under the radar beneath the mountain of bangers that 2022 has given us. This show really flew under the radar, and the only reason I heard of it was because I follow a lot of dub voice actors on Twitter, and I'm a big hardcore dub guy. I watch dubs a lot. I really like dubs, and a lot of dub people were saying that this show is really good, and the people who actually voiced the characters in the show were, I got to see like tweets of them popping up in my Twitter, so I was like, oh, that looks like an interesting show. I'll go check that out on Netflix when I get a chance. And I got a chance a couple days ago. Over the last 2 or 3 days, I watched the whole show. 2 or 3 nights. I usually I watch anime at nighttime, like when I'm like getting ready to wrap up the day. That's how I work. And it took me about 3 nights to watch the whole show. But yeah, I wanted to review it because I just finished it and I really liked it. It was a really good show. It is not perfect, and I certainly don't think it's like an Anime of the Year contender or anything. But I will say, for absolutely definite, before I get into the review and I just start spoiling shit left and right for you, definitely go check this out if you have a Netflix subscription. I thought this show was really, really, really fun, really solid. It's like I said, it's not perfect. It's not going to be an Anime of the Year contender or anything, but pretty freaking good, so I wanted to talk about it. So let's get into it. My review of Romantic Killer. Romantic Killer is the story of Anzu Hoshino, and Anzu is a big gamer. She plays games, she loves chocolate, and she loves her cat. I can definitely relate to that last one. She is pretty much just that, and she has pretty much completely thrown out the idea of romance and ever getting a boyfriend or anything like that. Completely out the window. She does not give a shit. And she gets a new game and pops it in, and it turns out to kind of be this kind of game where she is basically given this like familiar that basically turns her life into kind of like a real life dating simulator. So our main character is basically living in a dating simulator now. However, she has not given up the desire to not be in a relationship. So the basic setup for the show is that Anzu is stuck in this situation where she is basically living in a dating sim, but she does not want to be in said dating sim, and the little familiar that they sent out also took away her games, her chocolate, and her cat. So all of her favorite things have been taken away from her, and she now has to live this dating sim life, and she has no choice but to do that if she ever wants to get all of her stuff back. And she refuses to give in. She just keeps fighting it over and over again, and that's kind of your setup for the show. And as we go through the show, we slowly introduce more characters, and let's just jump into that. So our first character they introduce is, what was his name? Tsukasa Kazuki, right? Tsukasa Kazuki. The first big tier dude. And I quite liked Kazuki at first, but I think he actually gets really, really good as the series goes on. So Kazuki doesn't really have a ton to him at first, but they really, really fix that towards the end of the show. I will say this before we continue. I definitely think this show improves in quality as it goes on. Like, I think at like episode 5 or 6, the show kind of takes off a little bit. But yeah, Kazuki, at first he's a very simple character. There's not a lot to him, but it's pretty funny what kind of goes on with it. Because of the whole thing of them living in a dating sim, they're kind of indirectly pushed together. And I found it really funny how they kind of went about it, where you have, so at first, at this point in the show, the only thing you know is that Kazuki doesn't really want to date anyone. And he walks around school all the time because he's a very good looking dude, and people are always talking about him like, oh yeah, that guy, he's cute, he's hot, or whatever. All the girls are doing that. I wonder what that's like. Anyway. And he always wears this hat so he can like do it. And he's just like throughout the first couple episodes, he's just like trying to like get by. He's like, I wish people would stop talking to me. I wish girls would stop coming up to me. And at first, at this point in the show, you might be thinking like, oh, that's kind of shallow, and I don't know if I really like this guy. But we'll get into that when we get towards the end of the show, when that kind of changes like completely. But yeah, really, but the character is pretty solid. That was kind of his whole thing. And I really like how the whole situation kind of brings Anzu and him together, where you have this situation where his house gets flooded. Well, they run into each other. They've kind of developed a small relationship. And then his house gets flooded. But his house gets flooded because of the familiar and because of what Anzu's life has become. So basically, his house gets flooded and he ends up having to go live with Anzu, basically. And I found it really funny how they made this go, where he gets to her house because she wants him to kill a roach, because there's a roach. Also, that was a pretty funny scene as well, when there was the roach, and then they're like, roaches aren't fun to look at, so here's a slice of cake instead, and then they put a piece of cake over it instead of a roach. I appreciate that, because I hate cockroaches. But yeah, that was pretty damn funny. And she has Kazuki come over to his house to kill the roach, and after he kills the roach, out of nowhere, this massive rainstorm comes down, and then it's like this ridiculous flood. And I think the funniest scene is when he's about to leave, he's like walking out the door, and then this fucking branch just comes out of nowhere and takes and just penetrates fucking the door, and then he just closes the door. Yeah, I don't think I can leave. It's really fucking funny. Got a laugh out loud moment from me, man. That cracked me up. And that's kind of where we are there. So now we have Anzu and Kazuki living together. That's the first of the characters. And then we get Junta. Junta is the next character. Junta comes in and is like, I am a childhood friend of yours. And at first she doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. She doesn't remember him, doesn't know anything about him being a childhood friend or anything like that. We'll get into this. Now, I will admit something that I have to praise about this show, definitely. You have this character Junta who comes in, and I have to admit, when they introduced this plot line that he was like this, that he comes out of nowhere and he says that he's a lifelong friend, and Anzu is like, what the hell is he talking about? This must be the familiar. I'm just gonna start. Okay, the familiar's name is Riri, so I'm just gonna start calling her Riri. Okay, so the Riri is the familiar. So Riri sets it up to where, no, that's not what happens. She thinks that Riri has set him up to be a childhood friend when she has no idea what the hell she's talking about. And at first this rubbed me the wrong way. At first I thought this was a misstep in the show because it felt kind of sloppy. It felt like we went from a very fun and kind of small scale and not too much going on to kind of a ridiculous massive leap where you go from how do I explain this? You go from a very solid, grounded take where, a character is being brought together with guys because of a familiar doing things, but you go from that to a whole thing where we've been able to completely manipulate time and space in order to create this moment. I feel like that's going a little too far, but that is actually not what's going on here, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But we introduced to that character, that's the storyline we get there, and we actually find out that Junta actually genuinely likes Anzu. Kazuki and Anzu are basically just friends. They've completely told themselves that they are just friends and they are not anything more than friends and they never will be anything more than friends. That's definitely not going to be the case forever, but that is that. And Junta actually does genuinely like Anzu. He has liked her pretty much his entire life. That is his whole storyline. And then he ends up living with her as well after a little, so she comes out and there's a burglar who's stealing her mom's panties, and then he beats the shit out of her. Another thing that was obviously set up by Riri in order to get them together, obviously, continuing the whole living in a dating sim thing. I will admit, I thought this wasn't the best written thing. I think they could have gone about it in a much better way overall, but still pretty fun. It was still fun, and I like Junta as a character. Probably my least favorite of all the guys, I have to admit. He's just kind of boring, kind of basic, although they do definitely build him up towards the middle of the show, but I think the other guys are just a little bit more likable personally, but still a pretty solid character, and yeah, so that's how he's brought in. So now she is living with Junta and Kazuki, and then we're introduced to the final guy, which is Hijiri what was his last name? I forget his last name. Hijiri, but he's my favorite of the three guys. I thought this dude was fucking hilarious. He's kind of the signature pretty boy, but it's not like in every other anime where he's the pretty boy and the main character wants him and whatnot. In this one, the main character completely ignores him and he's offended that she doesn't like him because he's never been rejected by any girl in his life. So I found that pretty damn funny. He's a pretty fun character, and especially the way that they introduce him, because they set up earlier in the show that one of the dating sim things is a girl running with a fucking, we've all seen that. A girl running with a toast in her mouth and then hits another guy and it's oh, accidentally, sorry about that. But that's kind of how they set up this scene where she's being introduced and she's running down and she's realizing it, oh no, am I gonna run into another guy right now because of this situation? And then she gets hit by this guy in a car, which I thought was pretty damn fucking funny. And it's pretty funny how they go about it too, because it's he's I'm sorry about this. I'm stumbling over my words. It's really funny because he's like, my whole life, girls have just been getting hit by my car and trying to get dates with me and shit like that. And she's like, what the hell is that supposed to mean? That made me laugh pretty hard because, like, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time getting it out there. Basically, this guy, Hijiri, is like such a pretty boy, I guess, that girls would literally get hit by his car on purpose so that they could go on date, so that they had an excuse for him to take them on a date. And then he does this, and then she does this with him, and it kind of flips on its head and is like, yeah, you kind of fucked up this time, dude. But it's very, very funny. Very funny, and the character is very likable. Like I said, probably my favorite character of the show, if I'm being honest. I really liked Hijiri. He's just a very fun character. Then we move on to the end game of the show. Now, I have to say, like I said, I think that the first 4 episodes, after episode like 5 or 6, I think the show takes a pretty big upgrade, actually. It starts getting a lot more in depth and a lot more, I don't know how to say, I don't really want to say like, not like the writing doesn't change or anything like that, but it just feels a little bit more big. I don't know how to say it. I'm just going to continue with it. But we're entering the end game of the show, the last couple episodes, and these are easily the best episodes of the show because this pretty much fixed pretty much all of the issues that I talked about. Although there's still things I'm going to talk about that in my final thoughts, but it pretty much fixes just about all that because they reveal that Junta is actually a childhood friend. It has not actually been brought by Riri in this ridiculous plot line to where she has completely rewritten time in order for him to be introduced as that. No, he's actually legitimately her childhood friend that she actually forgot about because he went by a different name then and he looked completely different. And that introduction really kind of like threw me for a loop. I was like, oh man, that was pretty fucking brilliant how they worked that out because like I said, I didn't think that was a very good little addition to the show. But then they revealed that. I'm like, oh wow, that was really pretty well handled actually. I did not see that coming. I definitely thought that it was actually Riri like rewriting fucking time and they were just gonna play it off like that. And I'm like, because I was gonna be like, oh, that's kind of, I think that's kind of sloppy writing. I think they could have gone about that better. But no, this was actually really, really cool in my opinion. So that's the first big reveal. And then we get to the last couple episodes. But before we do that, I just remembered I really want to mention real quick, I want to talk about the animation, the art style, and the opening. But so real quick before we get to the final couple episodes, because that's where shit kind of goes down in this show. So the animation, the art style, it is good, but I hope if the show gets a season 2, we'll get a bit of an upgrade. It's not that it's bad, it's that it kind of gives me a bit of a, what's the word? It just doesn't feel, it gives me a bit of a cheap vibe, if that makes any sense. It's not that the show looks cheap, it's that it seems like the animation just feels a little, I don't know. I'm really trying to I don't know, if you just, from me watching the show, from me looking at the show, I felt like the animation could have used a bit of upgrading. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but it just kind of felt a little bit cheap to me, if that makes sense. I'm not 100% sure how I'm doing this. It's still very good. It's still very like watchable. The art style I actually do quite like. It's really just the animation that I think is just a little bit hit and miss in the show. I will say there are some pretty funny things they do with the art style. Like the main character will constantly have like different faces that get changed. Like at one point she gets like this weird monkey face and she constantly gets like this full on like JoJo face. It's pretty darn funny, man. The art clean, the people who drew the show clearly had a lot of fun with it. Yeah, it's definitely very funny. So I do like the art style, but the animation I do hope gets a bit of an upgrade in the next season, assuming the show gets a second season. Which I'm gonna say I hope it does. But the last thing I want to talk about is the opening. I'm just going to come out and say, I think the opening is pretty unremarkable, unfortunately. I am a big opening guy. I really love anime openings. It's one of my favorite things about watching anime, is getting to listen to the awesome openings. And this one just was very unremarkable, very generic in my opinion. I don't really remember it at all. It's okay. I listen to it every single time, and I like the visuals. The visuals of the opening are pretty darn good. It's just the song. The song is very unremarkable, very generic. Hopefully it'll get a better one for the second season. Like, I just finished watching Rent a Girlfriend Girlfriend Season 2, and that opening is like a fucking anime opening of the year contender. Like, oh my god, that opening is so good. Little quick mini review of Rent a Girlfriend Season 2. It fucking ruled. Okay, moving on. Seriously though, the opening is it's just really generic, unremarkable, unfortunately. So that's one point I gotta knock against this show. Definitely could use some nerve in the opening. The ending's a little better. I kind of like the ending a little better, although it's still nothing special. It's nothing spectacular or anything. So yeah, just wanted to say that as well before I forgot, and then we enter the final bit, because yeah, the final couple episodes of this really shit kind of goes down in these last couple episodes. It's not all greatness, but we'll talk about that. So first up, we're introduced to the plot. So Kazuki is revealed to have a stalker that has been pretty much ruining his life for pretty much his entire life. And then you kind of realize that that's why he's been walking around with the fucking hat, trying to ignore people, telling them not to come up to him. And you're like, oh yeah, okay, he's not actually a dick. Like, once again, they thought about that, just like what they did with Junta and the whole thing. It doesn't feel like sloppy writing anymore. It doesn't feel like the character just them writing that just so that character is like that for them to meet with Anzu and like each other. No, it comes back later in the show with this whole stalker storyline, and you're like, oh, that makes perfect fucking sense. So yeah, they introduce that, and then the shit kind of gets pretty fucking crazy. You get like half an episode dedicated to this stalker pretty much terrorizing his life, why he had to move away, why he avoids people, and they introduce that in like the second to last episode or the third to last episode, one of the last episodes, and then you have the continuation of that, where you have her finding Kazuki again. Anzu protects him, and now Anzu is on her list. And then the last episode, and the second half of that episode, and then the last episode is the end game of that. Now, I have to admit, I think this was pretty sloppily handled, which is one of my issues with the show. Like I said, it's not a perfect show, but one of my issues with the show is definitely how they handled this kind of confrontation with them. The problem with me is, so the first thing is you have this scene where Anzu is walking home and then she gets attacked by two dudes. Now, this one is less of a problem for me. Now, they play it off that the stalker hired the dudes to get rid of her. And then right before they're about to, do bad things, all of the people show up, and then you find out that Riri sent a bunch of texts to them so that they would all protect her. So that's the first thing. That I don't have a problem with. That one was pretty good. The one I have a problem with is the last one in the last episode. So this episode ends with the fucking stalker running at Anzu with a knife, and then you cut to a blood splatter. So you're like, oh shit. And then you get to the next episode, and what happened is the stalker literally just took a little tiny cut on her head, and there's just like it's literally just like a little scratch, and it's like, well, okay, so there's that. And then the way that they resolve this is the character just comes out and is like, stop that. And the way they play it off, he's like, I never want to see you ever again. I'm like, this girl literally just attacked a citizen with a knife. This girl needs to be locked up forever, bro. There is no, I don't want to see you ever again. She needs to be fucking put behind bars. And I mean, that is what happens with her. But seriously, like the way they play it off, like they act like she didn't just fucking attack somebody with a goddamn kitchen knife. So, yeah, I felt like that writing could have used a couple of extra runs through in that scene right there. But yeah, but then we enter the final little bit. Yes, I don't know. That's one of my pretty big issues with this show. I'm just like, that could have definitely been handled better. That definitely could have been handled better. But then you get to the final little bit of the show, which I thought was a very sweet little way to end the show, which is where you actually find out that Riri, first, Riri actually wipes the memory of the stalker chick, so she will leave them alone for all eternity now. She is no longer an issue. And then Riri is actually banned from actually being her familiar anymore, so that's kind of how they end it. But then they kind of do a little scheme to get Riri back. Like, they bring in this other familiar, and she's like, I'm gonna be the new Riri. But then Anzu kind of has a bit of a change of heart, because this whole show she's been pretty damn hostile towards Riri for good reason. She's kind of an ass. But they end this with a pretty sweet little thing where Anzu actually kind of uses a bit of does a little little bit of big brain power to actually get her back and keep her with her, so she's actually still the familiar and not the other chick who then at the end of the show proceeds to go to the stalker. So we'll see how that goes in the next season. I don't know. Maybe it won't go anywhere. Maybe they're just saying that to like that chick can have a better life, because they actually started building up that chick, the stalker. There was like a scene in like one of the last episodes where she was talking about like being bullied and stuff, and I thought they were gonna have a whole episode like we're gonna be following her why she's doing that, and it's just gonna keep building on that, but not yet. Maybe that'll be in season 2. I'm guessing they'll explore that in season 2 maybe, or maybe not. Maybe that's just how they're gonna end that character, and that's just gonna be that, and we're just gonna move on. But either way, I think I'm okay with that. Both of those sound pretty decent to me. So there you have it. That is Romantic Killer. And overall, I think the show is well worth a watch. A very entertaining, little fun, little rom-com, a fun little premise. Far from perfect, definitely far from perfect. It has its issues. There's some pretty sloppy writing. If I'm being honest, like at no point does the show really feel like it's anything more than just a pretty fun little slice of life watch, but it's still fun. It's still a very fun watch. It's just that it never really felt like it really got to a point where it was actually becoming like a legitimately great show, but it is a good show, and I do like it, and I would recommend it if you have a Netflix series. So that is my review on Romantic Killer. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section down below, and I'm gonna give Romantic Killer a grade of an A-. I think if the writing got a bit of an upgrade, the animation got a bit of an upgrade, they got a bit of a better opening, I think the show definitely has a possibility to get definitely higher in upcoming seasons. Hopefully, if the show does get upcoming seasons, I definitely want to see a season 2. I will definitely watch season 2 if it gets made. So yeah, go check this show out if you haven't. I definitely recommend it. Like I said, A- is gonna be my final grade. It's a pretty damn solid little romance show, and I mean, I know 2022 has been pretty much the year that just never stops giving for anime fans. This year has been an absolute godsend for weebs. But this is another one that I would recommend checking out before the end of the year. So there you have it, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe give me a like, subscribe for some more anime content in the future. Let me know all your thoughts on Romantic Killer in the comment section down below and my review. And this is DK Guillotine. Signing out.